And welcome to the show. I got CA Kanooble on here of Ho on the Run. It's also known for comedy and acting work. How are you?
Oh, good. How on the go? How on the go?
On the go, aren't we all? I'm on the go. I'm your host,
Yep.
Sully, and I was just thinking of just collaborating with just basically all of Twitter. And keep in mind, this was pre Elon Musk takeover, but yeah, CA had some cool options, and I was like, you know what? We haven't really done a book special, so we just list our top 10 books. I'll list five, she lists five, and be simple.
You'd think it'd be simple.
Right.
It's hard
And
when you read a lot to pick top books.
yeah, I was struggling to make it to an actual like top 10. I was like, I can't do it. I can do five. The rest would be like casual, but I was in both literature as well as women's lit. I just needed a fun elective, an excuse to just talk about books and novels and imagination versus what's on the page versus interpretation versus narrative and storytelling
Right.
and world building. And I just was like, yeah, there's always it was simple at first because I was like, what are some common books that were like taught in schools, some that are still on the getting banned every 5 years, and which ones are like just more obscure or more recent and contemporary. And it was an interesting maze. So thank you for putting me in the between the Minotaur and all these other mazes, and it was a fun challenge.
Yeah,
So
I appreciate you wanting to do it. Nobody ever wants to do this.
I like to have it be challenging and differentiating, especially when we're kind of a variety podcast. But it was a cool option that you brought up because it's like, well, challenge accepted. All these lists we've
Right.
been making for years now we can actually share it, discuss it,
Right.
without it sounding like clickbait or something pompous. How did before we start? How did you get into kind of reading?
Well, to be honest, I am the youngest of three girls, and we're all 15 months apart. And for anybody who plays video games, there's usually a player one and a player two, not quite a player three. So I spent a lot of time by myself. And fun fact, I actually taught myself to read at 5. And my mom tells the story all the time because she went to pick me up from a babysitter's house and I was reading a chapter book and she was confused. And, she took it from me because it wasn't exactly a children's book I was reading. It was one of those like adult. It was one of those adult love novels. And, she just thought I was just playing with it. But then I'm like, wait, I need to find out what happens to, and I named one of the characters and she just looked at me like I was insane. And she like looked in the book and it was sure enough one of the characters. And she was like, you can read, like this. So it's been a fun time for my mom.
I hear you. I was reading basically like books that were like spin-offs of like pre-existing movies and shows. So I'd read some Star Wars books. I'd read some other just kind of contemporary as well as just poetry and just and throughout the 2010s, I got into a bizarre habit of just in between shopping for food and utilities and everything, just reading pretentious novels that were on the New York Times bestsellers list. And that is where it just hit me as like, so fucking anybody can be on this list. It doesn't matter for how long or where or how. It just happens. It just does. It is what it is.
Right.
Oh man. It was crazy, and I was just guffawing because like some of them were just like you say, like a mix between something like infamous like Daniel Still to something just like even more just bizarre like a Stephen King kind of knockoff where you're just like, wait, what? And then he died. Dum dum dum. It's like, okay. It's just weird. Just novels, and you're just like, I can't even tell you what I just read, but I was guffawing the whole chapter. It was kind of Mystery
Right.
Science Theater level, but for books. So, and at the same time, like I didn't think it was really even much merit in like even criticizing it because at the end of it, it was like, okay, well, congrats, you were able to make your own book and get it recognized, and at the same time, I really just don't even know how to feel about it because this isn't leaving me with anything. So, just moving on. That was a funny experience. So yeah, this was kind of cool because we're actually just kind of talking about some books like we might have read more than once, or that just left such a huge impression. It blew our minds. It made us just say, that was an iconic novel because of this and that.
Ready, right.
And no, so thank you once again for this challenge. So in no particular order, uh, we can just list a few. I got my list. You got yours. I'll let you go with number one since you were number one for bringing this up.
My number one book favorite is actually Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. I know you're probably like, what?
No, that does make sense because it's still. I don't know that it's taught, but it definitely comes up. It was a bestseller back in the day. Say what you want about the
Yeah,
movie, but I've heard great things
it's
about the
actually
novel.
still number. I think it's like it's on the top 100 books of all time. Still to this day.
Okay, sweet. And you just really dug how this blended romance with like post Civil War drama, or was it
Right.
more than
Well,
that?
I really just I love Margaret Mitchell to start. She's kind of like the underdog. Most people don't realize like how many quotes that she has that are actually just really powerful. Um, as far as Gone with the Wind, I like that it is true to its time. Even the movie itself is, I know it's been under fire actually a lot because of the racism and things like that. But at the same
Yeah.
time, you look at the era and it kind of held true to what it was for the time.
Well, more or
So
less, I think a lot of people. That's a good point because there are many. I've seen the movie a few different times because it's on all the classic movie channels endless times, and depending on your mood and like all the other classic movies, depends on whether you like it or whether you acknowledge it without necessarily being a fan or consider it overrated. It all depends, but it is interesting in that yes, it I think James Elroy did this with LA Confidential. He's like, "Hey, you like the movie, but did you read my actual book?" And so it is
right.
interesting. Is like, yeah, because sometimes, and I had so many other pals and ex pals, long story short, who would just go on back and forth. It's like, well, and it's the same thing with comics. It's like what works on a page probably won't work as a movie, or vice versa. It works better as a movie but it was a flawed chapter in an otherwise entertaining book or something. And uh, what we see on screen that lasts for maybe 2 minutes might be 5 to 10 pages worth. We don't know until we
Right.
see it. And
Well,
it's,
there are
yeah,
just a lot of really good quotes in that book. I was just going to add, sorry.
no, that's fine. And so this resonated with you because you dug the characterization and the details. So that's cool.
Yep.
That's
Had a lot of powerful quotes that actually one of them I'm looking to get tattooed. So
oh really?
yeah. Well, there's one on reputation, and basically it says until you've lost your reputation, you never know what a burden it was or what freedom really is. And you kind of sit and think about that, like
Mm,
how powerful that statement is.
yeah, that's pretty gripping.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not thought about enough, especially when we see so many people abusing social media. And it's like, yeah, well, if you were in a world country, you'd lose a finger for that off color remark. Just saying.
Right.
Be fortunate that you're here and not, overseas where they don't take too kindly to criticism and then some.
Yeah, and I think it's also because as a generation, that's like what we chase is a reputation. It's like all we work for. Do you have a good reputation? Do you have a bad one? When we're not thinking
An
like
infamous,
how
but you're
free it
trying to
is to not
correct
have
it.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man. So that's badass. So in no order, I'm just gonna pick for number two, 1984 by George Orwell.
That's a great choice.
It may not be one that you're gonna like constantly like reread or what have you, but once you get through it, and in my case, it was reading as part of class, and everyone takes a turn reading a chapter. My mind was just constantly blowing because I was all into. I got into reading cyberpunk books by William Gibson years later, as well as just plenty of other just apocalyptic and sci-fi books. There's still this one that it's like Battlefield Earth, but good. Like I don't know the name of it, and I still I've joined various book groups and everything, and no one can tell me what it is. I have a suspicion it's the Deathlands books, but I don't know. And it was a cool kind of post-apocalyptic book with an emperor and everything. So I was a natural audience for 1984 because I had just read the comic book and then seen the movie version of V for Vendetta. But I was still into that whole
It's one
kind
of
of
my
just
favorite movies.
oh, well, even better. We're already on the same page. This is great. But
Yeah.
it was just still just kind of intriguing to just see is like, okay, if you had a Hitler version of America, and then much like, again, I had been fortunate enough to read the book of Fahrenheit 451, so I was already, it was a natural kind of building on that same message. It's like, what would happen if you just kind of like, defunding education today by various infamous states, but then go to the notch, just absolutely torch books. And this just, I constantly would just think back to this when we had red light ticketing in certain areas before states would sue some of those cameras. I even worked at a library and heard someone even mutter in the back one time, oh, at even a half price books, that's going to actually just go to the landfill. Like, it's a book. You can't. And so it, in many ways, I think it just affects my thinking in many ways. And it just even annoys me even more when people will just shout out terms like fascist or what have you just because they disagree. It's like, it's just like when people abuse any other political platform, like, don't call rape if you're just, unless that actually happened. Don't shout fire in a crowded theater if you're just pulling a prank.
Yeah.
Don't abuse that privilege. And so the same kind of deal here is like, do not, do an actual like government action that affects other people unless you are certain you have actually voted this in and this is happening. And it just blew my mind. And just, I have yet to see some of the rare, hard to find like TV adaptations of it. I know I didn't care for the actual 80s made movie version of it, but the book, I think it's just hard to adapt, and that's kind of the more why I like it even more. I don't have any shitty version of a movie to compare it to. I don't have a failed adaptation. Like, but for instance, the other day, I announced to my mother, is like, hey, I have the ultimate Blu-ray collection of Planet of the Apes and what have you, and she doesn't know about that. She knows about the 2000s awful remake. I'm like, and it was very apparent from what she was describing. I'm like, okay, so you don't know what I'm talking about. It's kind of like when you talk Star Trek, it's like, are you talking about the new, lens flare mindless movies, or are you talking about the deep, mind blowing other versions of it? So it's like, cool on you, whatever version you like, but just some people just they don't get into the same gear. And I think this book is just very intriguing because you were left to your own vision of what all these military and dictator futuristic characters all look like, and they're all kind of part of the same voice, echoing in all these viewpoints of this chaotic totalitarian society, dystopia in a way. And it's just creepy in a way, and it's not even a horror novel. It's just I kind of would get chills just kind of down my spine, is like, what would I do with just if I lived in this terrible society? But just again, the immortal line, Big Brother's watching you, and just I'll see people throw that out every once in a while, and I think it just affects my politics as well. As every once in a while, I will just just see someone signing in a bill. I think when the SOPA bill got signed in, that was like trying to censor internet searches and everything, that's where I was like, okay, so Big Brother really is watching us.
Right.
I'm cool with, hey, trying to crack down on creeps on the internet, or just just track down just anything like people had their work stolen, so therefore you're gonna do that. But when it got into utter like abuses of Homeland Security, that's where I was like, whoa, hey, just because someone looks up an article about terrorism doesn't mean they're a terrorist. Come on, don't be that paranoid.
Right.
So yeah, I did you ever read this book? Sorry, I've talked way too long.
That's okay. I have read the book. I have. I do really like that book. So
Okay, because there are just plenty of books who is like, hey, I acknowledge it, but I just couldn't read it. The diction was a little too tight. Like I some people might find this sacrilege, but you might be this way with Tom Clancy, where it's like, hey, I like his premise, but I don't like how he describes too much detail on a carrier ship or a submarine. It's just repetitive. And then there's others who is like, again, the description's the best part, but you kind of don't really like the flow of the story. It's interesting when you read a book how you might not it might be a bestseller, but it's not necessarily an intriguing read, or again, it's just a one-time scoop, or maybe it's a skim read. I don't know.
yeah,
Uh, but no, yeah, it just blew my mind, and I think it's an important tall tale, while also just being a good dystopian sci-fi book. So I'm just throwing it out there.
yeah.
What is your number 3?
My number 3 is actually called Alice, and I'm big on Alice in
Alice.
Wonderland. It's
Oh.
one of my favorites. This is a beautiful twist. It's by someone named Christina Henry, and just to give like a kind of short synopsis, it's kind of like there's no real Wonderland. It's just more like the rich and the poor, and they're separated in two areas. And Alice is kind of a rich girl, and her friend go into that poor area that's kind of off limits.
This is a
And things
2015
happen.
novel for those who don't know.
Yeah, sorry. And it's actually there's more than one book now. I didn't even know that. There's a whole series, but so I'm on Amazon buying books right now. No, I'm kidding. Um, but in this book, her and her friend kind of go there. Things happen, and she ends up in a mental institution because of it. Because she's talking about these crazy things, and her family is just like, we're not dealing with this. And there's a guy that she meets. They call him Hatcher, but really it's kind of like the Hatter for her. And
The
there's
Mad
something that
Hatter.
happens, and they escape. Yeah, there's something that happens and they escape, and they're kind of just like running from this monster, and there's magic, and it's kind of like gang territories and things like that. So it's just
Mm-hmm.
really cool read. It's one of my favorite books. I must have read it at least 6 times, just because it puts like that mental health aspect to it, where she is crazy, is she not crazy, and the gang turf thing, and just seeing how that plays out is just really cool.
That is very unique. So, because it's hard to write fantasy without being accused of stealing from just whatever, Rings, Mists of Avalon to, the billionth, Conan the Barbarian or Lord of the Rings type, you know, icon. So this is cool that this author, I was not familiar with this, but I, pulled it up as soon as you brought it up, and it's just interesting how, again, she writes about what she loves. Just do a twist, just twist it around. Your popular Grimm's fairy tales and what have you. That's I'm looking
Yeah.
at some of her other stuff she's had, and I think my sister might have brought up one of these on a casual conversation. So this is a cool find. Fine.
Yeah, I really like too, because there's nothing fantasy about it. Like it's all pretty much horror, and just it's really gripping. But it's kind of like taking
Not
your favorite
flashy.
fairy tale character and putting them in like real life gritty situations.
Even better. Something that the viewer can at least relate to and just be like, oh, shit just got real.
Yes, absolutely.
So sweet. That will be something for those listening to look up, because, creativity's still around, guys.
Definitely,
It
definitely.
exists. It exists. Oh, so that's awesome. So my number 4, I'm gonna go with. Oh man, I'm going with S.E. Hinton, another female author, The Outsiders.
That's a good choice too.
Yeah, have you read this one?
There isn't much I haven't read,
Okay,
to be
well,
honest.
nice. No, you'd be surprised. So that's awesome. Um, yeah, this was another one. I think I read it in junior high, and then I read it in high school. It was just a common occurrence. Like there wasn't any encounter where people weren't not reading it. And I dug this, and I still to this day fucking hate the movie version. But Anyway,
Yeah, I was going to say this is one that I've actually seen the movie before I read the book. So I was like, there's no way. And then I read the book. I was like, oh, this is so much better.
yeah, it has depth, and you watch the movie, and you're just like, even with watching the director's cut, you're just like, there's barely anything adapted into it. Like in my version, I even casually would bring this up with one of my former aunts. She's now just a friend because she divorced from the family, but she was all into pop culture and everything, and we would just go back and forth. It's like, okay, if there's one good casting they did, definitely was Patrick Swayze as Derry, just the older brother who's the watchdog. I just dug the whole just story of Pony Boy and Cherry Soda, I
Yeah.
think was her name. Just everybody just on the run, just, and I was picked on as a kid, so I just instantly related to just the whole just fighting against bullies, but be the bigger man. This isn't some Karate Kid bullshit. This is just on the run, kind of a fugitive, just kind of, and kind of going into kind of what William S. Burroughs and other authors were talking about, just the whole beatnik generation. And I liked how they humanized them, everything, and it wasn't like, say, just they're outlaws or modern day neo-Western, although if you wanted to go that angle, you could. But like, I imagine just so many of the other things, like one of the other troubled kids, just when they describe how he robbed a liquor store or something, I'm like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
imagining like a Terminator type shootout or some shit. I was just imagining all kinds of things, and I unfortunately, I just, if I wouldn't even mind a minority version of this. You could totally do something
Right.
with an all-star black cast or something. I wouldn't care, as long as they just really went in depth. And I've read some other casual S.E. Hinton books, but like this book just is a gem, and I will always, if someone wanted me to just buy books for them, like, what are your top books, I would buy this in a pack with other stuff that we'll mention shortly. But I was like, please, just, even if you don't love it, at least give it a skim, just because that there is some juicy details. I like the quirks and dialogue of these characters. It's dynamite. But yeah. Oh man. But yeah, I'm sorry you had to watch the movie version before watching the
Yeah.
book.
After I watched the movie version, I was like, there's no way this is this bad. Like, there's got to be something better for this.
Yeah, it's just a very mediocre movie, and I get that. I would even casually mention it with other people, and they're like, "Oh, you don't like it? I loved it growing up." I'm like, "Well, because you were distracted by the stars whose careers it made. It doesn't have anything to do with the actual
Right.
narrative, which there really isn't much of any. It's just show up, 20s style music plays, and then beat each other in the rain." And I'm like, okay, so uh,
Right.
okay, so what is your number 5?
So, for me, it's three books, and there's three separate books, but I kind of group them into one. Um,
Oh,
it's Tithe, Valiant, and Ironside. They're by Holly Black. I like them because it has elements of fantasy and real world. My favorite is actually Valiant, but that's the second in the trilogy there. That's kind of why I wanted to mention all three.
oh,
They're each can be
gotcha.
read independently, but they include characters from past books.
Okay, so this is by Holly Black, and this is the modern fairy tales of 2019. Okay, sweet.
Yes. So my favorite is actually Valiant, and just to give like a kind of short, sweet, and to the point description. A girl and her boyfriend are supposed to go to a hockey game. He doesn't show up, so she goes home, and he's doing things with her mother. So she kind of loses her mind, hops on a train, and shaves off all her hair, and ends up living in the tunnels in New York with a couple other people. And they start doing something called Never, which is kind of a drug, but it's kind of like fairy dust, basically,
Oh,
where you can
for
kind of
sure.
shift reality and stuff, and she becomes addicted.
Does it
And
make them
there's just
hallucinate?
no, it literally makes them change reality. Like, for example, they go into somebody's house and they're like trying on all their clothes and stuff. The people are like, yes, please come in, because they tell them like, you want us to be here. And they believe it because they're on the Never. So they kind of like, can change and persuade people and persuade reality. So
Mm.
it's just a very cool read. It's her kind of getting really addicted, and she meets somebody who's a troll, and there's of course love in there, and just battles, and just a whole big thing, but it's just a really cool read. And it's really cool how she kind of adds like real world struggles with fairy tale elements. It's the same with Tithe, the first book in the series. So they're like top 5 books. So
Nice. So
definitely worth the read.
I just well, I believe you. I looked it up, and she's apparently won like just about every other award you can think of, including the Nebula Award. I mean, that's top honors here.
Yeah, she's an incredible person. It's funny because I tell people all the time because I like commented on something that she had posted online and she liked my comment, and I like raved on that for like
you're
months
kidding me.
because she's like one of my top favorite authors, just because of how how crazy some of the stuff she comes up with is, but it's so great, it's just like this lady must be some kind of crazy, but the best kind.
I mean, the imagination came from somewhere, and whether it was from being bored or just actually just I want to do this and just being up all night and then outlining it again and again until it made coherent sense and it was her style, whatever you got to
Right.
do.
And I mean, even the first one, it's like this girl and her mom's like a band. She's in a band. She don't really pay attention to her. And this girl's like going through things, kind of by herself. So there's just a lot of emotion in her books and a lot of, things that we can relate to. And that one is actually based in New Jersey. So it's really cool how she adds that elements of fairy tale and real life, but the worst parts of real life, there's some like inappropriate touching and, setting boundaries and dealing with parents that aren't that great, so
Oof.
yeah,
Is
really,
this
really great stuff.
very brutal? Like what age range is this?
I would definitely say it's young adult. Yeah, I'd say probably, like at least 13 and up. It's not that there's any, sexual assault scenes, but just like somebody trying to touch her inappropriately and her setting her boundary and how it affected her in a friendship and things like that. So there are some adult themes, but it is a young adult book. They're all 3 young adult books. I definitely say Valiant, say for when you're a little older. I wouldn't let a 13-year-old read that one just because of the scene with the mother and the boyfriend, but it doesn't get too descriptive, but it's, enough.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, hey, this is how we figure it out is, we only know until we actually look it up. So.
Right.
Okay. So that was, I'm sorry.
I think that was 3.
That was your number 5. My bad. Yeah. And
that was number 3 for me. Because it did Gone with the Wind, Alice, and then this one.
Okay. Well, shit. Okay.
5 altogether because you gave your 2.
Even no matter how I list it, I will always lose track of it. So I will just take your word.
I got you. I have written down.
Okay. So I am gonna go with wherever this is in the whole top 10 list. This is my number 3, which is J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit.
Nice. I thought you were going to say Lord of the Rings. I was like, how? No. That book was so hard to get through.
Yeah, absolutely. I only got through it due to my grandmother, and she wasn't even crazy about the movies. Plot twist. So yeah, I'll take a big step back. Basically, I read this in 6th grade, fell in love with it, and back when my mother would actually get me and my siblings around, and we'd actually read before we got tired and went to bed. I ended up renting a copy of this from the library and reading this, and it was kind of a hit. People liked just talking about it, describing the various stuff, and just everything from how the dwarves were described to escaping goblins and spiders in the forest. It was an instant hit. I have read it 3 times. So yeah, it made an impression on me, and I recommend it to anybody. It's
absolutely.
It's actually why and it didn't take long before I saw the Lord of the Rings movies and saw the final one in the theater, but long story short, never cared for them making a trilogy of book version of The Hobbit, let alone just it didn't work for me as a movie at all. Like, just it was very drawn out. But I this book just spoke so highly to me, and so for the longest time, because I watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy nonstop, I eventually actually gave the actual book and even most of the Silmarillion a moment of my time, and was able to read it with my grandmother. And I mean, that is all great and good in its own right and everything. So I am a pretty huge fan of Tolkien's poems and what have you. But The Hobbit just speaks louder than words to me, probably because it's just extremely just vivid with its imagery. Yeah, there's a lot of other laid back humor, and you relate to Bilbo because he's basically the outsider, much like we are, going on this unusual adventure. And
Right.
I just I can't recommend it anymore. I just think it is a very neat read, whether you're reading a Cliff Notes versus reading the actual version of one of the, transcribed, books. Uh, yeah, I don't think anyone really loses.
Yeah.
Have, so you read Lord of the Rings first. Did you ever read The Hobbit?
I have read The Hobbit. I want to say I read The Hobbit. I still have yet to fully get through Lord of the Rings because I have all of it in one book.
Yeah.
And it's kind of something that you have to really have quiet, and you really got to be determined to pay attention. And I have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something
Yeah.
I kind of pop out, pop in, pop out, pop in. So
truth be told, the actual movie version of Lord of the Rings, like whether you're watching the theatrical or extended cuts, they pretty much got most of it down to a T. On rare occasions, I would see actual Tolkien fans on forums or in person say didn't care for the movies, I like the book better, but uh, they really didn't change too terribly much up. Like, really, the minor stuff is probably just in a nutshell, they skipped the Tom Bombadil chapter, even though they had an actual actor and filmed a scene and made a trading card of him, because it's kind of redundant as a movie. It's like basically they spend a night in his forest and then say, "Oh, well, so he won't be able to shield us from the ring."
right.
That's it. And then uh, from that point on, the elves, for whatever reason, are it actually works better cinematically. They were actually in Return of the King and at Minas Tirith, but they decided no, just have them be at Helm's Deep instead in Two Towers. But any other choices, Arwen really only comes near the end, on horseback with the other elves. But for movie version, it makes sense to have her
Right.
save the hobbits. And but for the most part, it all pretty much just blends together. And whether or not you want to read it or not, it's still some very intense imagery, but like you say, it is a long haul. You can't have any distraction. But if you really set your mind to it, you can have a totally different interpretation of it. In some ways, I always felt like those Dunedain Rangers were painted as almost kind of a Highlander-ish kind of people versus
Right.
in the movies where it's like, hey, they're scouts, they're almighty men. But you have all this other just kind of stuff that, yeah, you can pretty much, regardless of whether you've seen any movies or TV shows that are fantasy, you can have your own interpretation of it. And I think that's why it's just kind of always been a best-selling fantasy book that inspired others. But yeah, Hobbit I just recommend just because it's just shorter. And what drove me just crazy when I saw the movie version was just how they elongated just the whole like escape from like the Wood Elves prison. And I'm just like, why did that become like three different battle scenes? Like, it's just no need. It didn't contribute anything.
Right.
And that's like my and in my personal uh, I'm not a stickler for you gotta adapt every chapter of the book, but just come up with something better if you don't like that chapter for whatever reason. But I was like, yeah, that's like the least interesting chapter to me. So I don't know why anyone would even just want to elongate it, just stretch it out. It just doesn't.
Right.
Whatever. It is what it is. Nothing I can do. It was going to be made one way or the other. But the book is just very neat, and I like how Bilbo is kind of a humorous guy. It actually made me, I think, understand and accept Lord of the Rings movies better. I did watch some of those cheesy cartoons from the 70s, so that was interesting. But yeah, altogether, I mean, I think it's just an easier read and just a fun adventure, and I think most people can get into it regardless of whether they've seen any version of it. But yeah, no, I don't have anything else. If you got any closing thoughts.
No, I think you pretty much covered it.
Okay. So what is next on your list?
So next on my list, where did I just put it? I just had it in front of me. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
All right, here we go.
My phone keeps going to sleep. I'm like,
yeah, that's what just happened. So next, it's just an author in general, Jane Austen, and I know that's like, what are you, an old lady? But it's
I knew many.
It's true, but it's not what you would think it is. It's not Pride and Prejudice like everyone else, although that is a honorable mention for me. It's actually Persuasion is one of my favorite books, and the movie adaptation they made was pretty good too, because it followed the book pretty well. But it's about not listening to everybody else. It's kind of this woman. She meets this guy, but he didn't have any money. So her family, because they were very rich, would not let her be with him. And he goes off and on his own little adventure. And then 10 years or so later, I believe it is, he comes back and he's just like well established and everything like that. And it's them kind of realizing that it was outside sources that kind of pulled them apart, and her just kind of saying, screw you to her family and being with them anyway. So it's just a great love story about like not listening to what everybody else has to think about your relationship and just kind of following what you want and your heart, to live your best life.
Sorry?
Persuasion.
Okay, shoot. So I'm a dipshit. I do not know this. I've seen plenty of adapted versions of Pride and Prejudice. I actually even like the movie The Jane Austen Book Club because I think that's a realistic look at having a book club.
There's another one too, a movie that they made, and it's got the chick from Felicity. I forget what the name. Yes, Carrie Russell. What is the name of that
movie?
It's not Book Club. Austin. There you go. That is a great movie too, and it's funny because they have the main actor. His name JJ Field. I'm sorry, he's like one of my favorites. Man crush forever. So if he's listening at any point in time, like
the guy is not Tom Hiddleston, but yeah, I know who you.
Right. Yeah, no. He plays kind of like the main love interest, but he's also in a lot of Jane Austen adaptation movies. So I just thought it was so clever that they have him in there. Jennifer Coolidge in that movie is just hilarious. It's like in the movie, because the book is good too, but it's just kind of like she's obsessed with Jane Austen and she's single as a Pringle, and a rich aunt dies and kind of sends her to this Austen style getaway that most rich people do, just, and you have you got to wear the costumes and everything. And it's just her going through this and kind of realizing, that you can't always get like Mr. Darcy, so, but then she ends up with, Mr. Darcy. So.
Okay. Very neat. So Persuasion, everybody.
Persuasion is that. Austen is just an honorable mention, but
is this your favorite of Jane Austen's material?
Yeah, Persuasion is definitely my top book. Pride and Prejudice is a good second, and Northanger Abbey is actually a third for me. But I love all of her books. So
nice. So this is in her top 10, though. If you had to, how many books has Jane Austen done for dipshits like me who don't know?
Oh, that is a good question, because even I don't have the answer to that.
You're not the genius. Well, but so were you just in general already a fan of just period piece and costume dramas and intrigue?
Yeah, complete book. She has 6 complete novels.
Oh, 6.
So yeah, Sense and Sensibility, Emma, Persuasion, Pride and Prejudice. Mansfield Park is another great one too. So
that I think
most of these are
years ago,
pretty popular. Yeah, all of them actually have movie adaptations. So I think, is there any exception? Do they have one for? I think they all have adaptations. So
why do you think people have found out how they can market it and why it's just easier to get into? Do you think?
What? I'm sorry, I missed the question.
Why do you think her material is easy to get into and adapt?
Well, I think because it kind of feeds into that womanly, romance aspect of things, Um, I really think that's why her books are so popular. Because, it's just like there's always a happy ending and everybody always finds love in the end. And they actually have adaptations of her book like Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. I haven't read that yet. And Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters are the only two I've seen. I actually found one of them. I have it because I found it at the dollar store. And I was like, why is this $1? But as a side note, the dollar store has really upped their book game, ladies and gentlemen. Like they have really
If you
started getting
want
some
to
good books in
save
there.
and you want physical copies, go to the dollar store. Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely did do that a lot when I wasn't going to like used bookstores. I would go to the dollar store and you'd find just about something for everybody.
Yeah, and you know what? I love the dollar store or the $1.25 stores we should call it now. That's a
Yeah.
whole side note how I feel about that, but it's like 25% increase. That's crazy. Anyway, but yeah, they I've always gone to like thrift stores and flea markets and bookstores to get copies of books just because I love to read. If I showed you my bookshelf, you'd be disgusted.
No,
Just
I
because
wouldn't.
I have
I'd
a
applaud you for actually
I'm going to send you
having.
pictures when we're done because
Okay.
it's a lot. But I just love grabbing new books and new things to read. So it doesn't mean I always read them. Sometimes they sit on my shelf for quite a long time, but um, I usually go by the cover, to be honest. That's how I pick a book that I'm going to read. It's all about the cover art. It really is. But when it came to like Jane Austen books, it was just kind of like I used to go to the library with my mom and my sisters all the time. Like I said, I was the avid reader, so it was really more for me than them. And it was like, what can I get? Because we can't come back for another week and a half. What's going to last me a week and a half here? Like, and it still didn't. It took me less than a day. But I mean, I finished the Harry Potter books in less than a day. So each one, not all together, obviously.
Hey, still pretty neat.
Yeah, I read very fast. So,
Okay, well, cool. So all together, uh, this has just been cool because we're actually just getting into how it just kind of developed our reading style and what have you.
yeah. And honestly, I read a lot too because it's a good way to develop your vocabulary.
Mm-hmm.
So, and reading out loud helps your, public speaking.
Public
So,
speaking, actual
yep.
just kind of persona.
Yep.
It's just all kinds of factors there. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
It's absolutely beneficial.
badass. So, I wish I had something as intriguing and insightful as a period drama, but I don't. I have basically the king of sword and sandals. I have Homer's The Iliad.
That's a fantastic book.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it's basically when I got, into late high school, like I just fell the hell in love with Greek mythology. I just look forward to whichever character I would portray and how each god symbolized all kinds of things, and it's just epic. I already liked, watching movies about Vikings and gladiators and sorcerers and what have you, but I was more even too in that, it's like this is ancient, this is uh, the founder of Greek mythology, like what it is written about, how these guys, answer to these gods, and then incorporated into actual, Greek rulers and what have you. It's like, yeah, it just makes you wonder. It's like, what were said rulers, thinking back then? Was the fall of Troy by, actual, Greek gods intervening and affecting the outcome of the war? It just affects everything from Joseph Campbell to just sci-fi epics and what have you. And I see people even shit on the movie Troy. I don't mind it as that kind of movie, but I would have actually not minded actually seeing some fantasy elements incorporated into there. It did make me read similar books like Michael Crichton's Eaters of the Dead, which you might know as the 13th Warrior.
Right.
We'll return after these messages. Hello and welcome to Culture Shocked, the pop culture podcast brought to you by four aging millennials and our outdated opinions. Join us every Tuesday as we discuss movies, TV, games, and even music, new and old.
Dude, what do you think you're doing?
Are you seriously trying to record a promo without us right now?
Well, yeah?
Dude, you can't just do the promo by yourself. Who's gonna listen to that?
Yeah, and you probably haven't even told them that we're a pop culture podcast where we always agree on everything. For instance, the Sam Raimi trilogy, easily being the best of the Spider-Man movies.
No. But I think we can all agree that Jaws is a classical masterpiece.
Nope, don't like that. But we do all agree that the sequel trilogy of Star Wars is the best in the Skywalker saga, right, guys?
That comment is so ridiculous. I don't even know where to begin.
Anyways, that'll do it from all of us here at Culture Shock. Thanks for listening.
Hey, it's Brent Pope, the host of Breakfast with Brent Pope. You've seen me on some of your favorite TV shows saying things like, "Give it up, Jimmy. You got to sink this putt to win." On Breakfast with Brent Pope, I sit down with guests from the entertainment world, and we do it all over breakfast. Or should I say Brentfast? Every week on Brentfast, you get inside Hollywood info and tips, great breakfast recs and booty debates. Most of all, you get the most delightful 30 minutes of your week. So dig in. It's Brentfast time. Listen at Brentfast.com, Apple Podcasts, or wherever fine podcasts are found.
Do you ever find yourself thinking about who would win in a fight between Goku and Superman? Hi, I'm James Gavsey, and on the Who Would Win show, me and my co-host Ray ignore anything important happening in the outside world and debate fictional battles between characters from comics, movies, and video games.
We got a new show every week, and almost always am I the winner.
Yeah, not true, Ray.
In the past, we've discussed such matches as Captain America versus Darth Vader, Solid Snake versus the Iron Giant, classic matchups like RoboCop versus Terminator, and even the Muppets versus Sesame Street.
That one was crazy. So if you're a fan of geek culture and love a spirited debate, check out the Who Would Win show wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out at whowouldwinshow.com.
We let things pile up in the DVR, we add them to our queues, we wait for the DVDs and Blu-rays. We time shift. The Time Shifters Podcast. Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, superheroes, comedy, action, film, television, maybe some not-so-current events. Find us on iTunes or at timeshifterspodcast.com.
Cool thing about Blind Knowledge is we are in multiple countries. We are worldwide all across the globe. We are in the US, we are in the UK, we are in Canada, Germany, India, Japan. We're in Australia, y'all. BlindKnowledge.com. Now back to the feature presentation.
It's pretty cool if you like just Viking folklore. Basically, it's an Arab emissary who's asked to follow these Vikings, and it has parallels with Beowulf. And I read some of that, in class, but that's very hard to translate.
Very hard read.
And it's, even when you have people performing the different parts, it's a lot to take in. And I think just Homer's The Iliad, I just intrigued even more by, because it's not, people think when they think Greek gods, they think of just Hercules and other crap like that. And I'm just like, no, but there's something more to it. You're just seeing all just it goes from swords and sandals, then it becomes sword and sorcery, and then it just all the other intrigue. And just reading that along with Shakespeare plays pretty much just determined how my respect for how these have been adapted nonstop all throughout the years.
Right.
But altogether, are you into any of Homer's various Greek mythology?
I love Greek mythology. I mean, I'm not going to pretend I've read it anytime recently.
No.
Honestly, I haven't read much anything recently, but it's definitely something that piques my interest. I'm actually working on a novel myself that kind of plays into the gods and goddesses and things like that. So,
you want to create your own world with your own set of rules, your own universes, and your own gods that affect the change.
Right.
Okay. Cool. Cool. So, yeah, whatever your next pick is, I think we're getting to the end of our list.
I have one more on my list, and then I have a couple just honorable mentions. the next one on my list is another oldie. It's Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte. I'm sure you've heard of it.
Oh, you're going
Yeah,
way back.
yeah. There, it's definitely one of my favorites, just because it's less, it does have that, happy ending, but there's so much struggle beforehand, so much struggle and so much, abuse and mental issues, and just kind of going through this poor girl, like she goes through it most of her life, and it's like being this damaged person and settling for, trying not to settle for a damaged love or a situation that she's not comfortable with, and kind of put her foot down, and then ending up going back to be with that person anyway, but only after he's become like a damaged and broken man. So it's just a really good read. So
Okay.
the movie was good too. So most of the adaptations are pretty good. So
yeah, there's been like a dozen adaptations of Jane Eyre.
oh, absolutely, at least.
Hey, it's either that or Lady Chatterley's Lover.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding. So, do you dig this? What do you think is compelling about this book? Just
again, the struggle, honestly. She was abused a lot as a child because she was taken in by, someone who didn't want her. And, just they sent her to the school that was like equally kind of abusive, and still trying to find the positives in it, and still ends up, leaving on good terms and go back and working at the school. And she ends up working at this place to take care of this man's daughter, and she falls in love with him. He proposes to her, but then it turns out he's already married. The girl's just insane, and he kind of keeps her like locked up, and there's just like a bunch of crazy stuff. So she runs off, and there's so much more. But yeah, you'd have to read or at least watch the movie, but it's just really good. But she goes through it, man, and like relatable. So
well, there you have it. Okay, wow. Shit.
yeah, it definitely keeps you entertained.
I could not have summed it up better. So I don't think anyone else could. Nice. Because I see other people say it's either romantic or it's about imprisonment, but you're pretty much just summed it all of it up. You just summed up all the elements.
Yeah, I mean both. So
why not both? Okay, so I'm going with Samuel Clemens, but to the world he's known as Mark Twain, Mr. Philosopher. I can't speak today. Philosopher. Why am I pronouncing it that way? That's stupid. And humorist Mark Twain. I'm going with his only adventures of Huckleberry Finn.
Nice. That's a good choice too.
I was just trying to go back and I'm just trying to think of one that wasn't thick, that didn't make me have to force myself to finish it, because there's plenty of other ones like Arthur Miller's The Crucible and what have you. And I was like, no, let's go with one that just was a cool adventure that I really would legit like to see someone do an animated or live action version of. Years ago, I just thought, hey, what isn't Val Kilmer starring this with the Coen brothers or some shit like that? It's just, no one ever adapted it. I do not know why. Is it because it's set during slavery, post Civil War, about the South? I mean, you could literally just make it be an adventure and just reinforce the whole notion of two unlikely friends. Tom Sawyer's the wild child while Huck Finn's just the runaway kid, I just think it would be movie magic and no one's wanted to touch it. I don't know why.
Yeah, well, probably because of the slavery aspect of it.
I think so. I mean, I'm not saying you couldn't acknowledge it. I just thought it was just an interesting look also at it's hard to describe, just the escapism aspect. What would it be probably like in the 1860s if you were just going state to state at that time on the road and just characterizing all their characters. Huck Finn has a more kind of reserved kind of look, and Sawyer's just kind of all like, I kind of always got a notion that he was kind of like, again, that era's version of kind of a hippie. He's like, dude, you think too long and hard about this. You gotta just go with it. You gotta be your own guy. You gotta be your own person. You gotta be your own Dill.
Right.
I mean, and they both have their pros and their cons. Like Huck Finn has kind of been just a farm boy, but he feels kind of imprisoned by his, strict parents and in the various colorful people he meets that he gets into trouble with. It's almost Hatfields and McCoy's level, and I like how Sawyer can kind of do everything from just go fishing and hunting to just all other sorts of things. He's kind of the gadget man in a way. So I'm just
right.
I just an unlikely buddy duo, and I totally recommend it to anyone who's read any version of it. Thoughts?
Great. I mean, I really like it because it kind of makes you question, like, what is the true price of freedom?
Yes.
It really makes you think about things. So that's one of my favorite parts of it. It gives a lot that you can take away from it. So you want to find a better life, and everybody else is kind of against you on that. Yeah, it makes you kind of think of like morality, like what is right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So definitely a good read. Fun fact, actually, about Mark Twain, as a side note, because he's one of my favorites as well. He was born 2 weeks after Halley's Comet's closest approach was in 1835, and then he left with Halley's Comet when he died, when it came back. So, fun fact.
Wow.
Yeah. Weird, but fun fact.
No, that's neat. Damn.
So anybody born if Halley's Comet ever comes back is going to be the next Mark Twain, is what I'm saying. No, I'm just kidding.
Let's go for it, guys. Because he left us all this knowledge, all these metaphors, all these sayings. Someone's got to restate them. Be the next one.
Yeah, I'm full of like random fun facts. So
I'm glad. Once again, I'm glad you brought up this whole topic, and you're going to close this out. What's your part 5 of your list?
Well, I have a few honorable mentions. I'll just list them real quick as a closeout. The Looking Glass Wars by Frank Better, another good Alice in Wonderland twist. A lot of battles, a lot of struggle for who's going to be, because Alice is a princess, but the Red Queen kind of took over in a dictatorship style. Good book, good read. There's definitely more than one, so check them out. Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. The book, fantastic. Movie was a really good rendition of the book, but the book has a lot more in it. So definitely a good read.
Everyone gets into a war of words over Ernest Cline when it's kind of meant to be kind of a fun book, and some people just find some of the way he writes hackneyed or some shit, and I'm just like, I don't think it was meant to be too serious, really, right?
I think people just get kind of triggered with the way he set the world up, like everybody's really close quarters, they're in this fantasy world as a way to escape reality because it sucks, in stacked up trailers, everybody's poor. And I mean, the way the world is right now, I think people just get scared because they think that's where we're headed. Because in a way we are. I mean, we go to social media as a way to escape from reality. You've got these virtual reality things now. So I think it's just more the fear when they read that, like, is this what's going to happen to us kind of thing.
I mean, that could definitely be true. I was just mainly just talking, why does people make a fuss about how he does grammar and everything? It just sounds very jealous or like nitpicky for the sake of nitpicky.
Yeah, people will find something to complain about and everything.
I mean, I gave up on what's his name who did Aragon after a while. It just seemed like he was just taking better stuff from other fantasy books and movies.
Yeah.
But there's other times where it just seems like, I mean, it's not like they said on record with an ego, I'm the best author of all time. It just seems like other times, like people will put words in their mouth and like, I think they're just making a living doing what you guys are too better to actually get off your ass and do.
Right.
I mean, shit. So good picks. And once again, thank you for suggesting this very fun sit down.
Of course.
Do you have anything on your podcast, Hoes on the Run?
Ho on the go.
Ho on the go. So why would I?
That's okay. But the hoes are on the run, so
I have
it's okay.
To it, but it is good.
So I actually just had my season finale for season 2. Season 3, I'm going to take a break because I did not take a break between season 1 and 2. And with the holidays and everything, it's just, and I have a mental health project that I also have. I'm just kind of putting that to the side for now. I am pre-recording some of the episodes, and I will be going live. Like this weekend, I'll be in New York. I'm a comedian, so I'll be at SantaCon with the rest of the crazy people of New York, dressed in a Santa suit. So I will be live streaming some of that. And the week after, actually, my own comedy show, I'm going to be doing a live episode there with interviews and stuff with the comedians. And then I'll drop one episode that I pre-recorded just for fun. But season 3 won't actually start until January just because I'm switching platforms and kind of how I run things. I have a lot of powerful episodes coming up. My season 3 opener is going to be about human trafficking. So I try to, it is like fun and I try to keep it fun and light, but it is a variety show. So I want to get into some more powerful topics with it as well, because now I have the voice and the platform to do so.
Right. And it doesn't make sense to overpower yourself or, again, just run out of material or just feel like you're just talking to yourself. And
yeah, well, I think for me, it's just more like, because I have so much going on, I don't like to do things rushed or, present like not top quality material. My Hoe on the Go podcast is based off a book I wrote in my 20s called The Hoe Handbook. So I really have a lot of topics that are from that book, but now I kind of want to branch out a little bit from that. Just because through my mental health project, I've met a lot of people. I want to be able to give them the platform to speak more. And now that I have a pretty good listening following and a lot of followers on my Hoe on the Go podcast, I want to use that, for good and not for evil, so to speak.
There you go.
But there are still, there are some episodes that are sexually based, and there will still be sexually based episodes just because I do teach, people how to please and be pleasing through sexual and self-empowerment. So
everyone's thinking it, regardless of where they want to talk about it. So
that's right. And I'm the one saying it. So
you're very progressive with your tone too, as well.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. It's the trauma. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't know. It just seems like half the time people like to, again, if they're not trolling each other on TikTok, they're accusing each other of being a loaded talk show. And it's like, well, you got to actually listen to the talk show before you state, hey, I do or don't like your tone. It's like, well, we can only improve with like some criticism. And it was
Absolutely.
cool meeting you and others on Twitter, because there's just so many people who, like, some of them actually want to collaborate and others just kind of want to just bitch and ask loaded questions. And I'm now trying to restrict some of my activity on that. I'm like, do you actually care or do you just want clicks?
Yeah. And I've noticed a lot of people too with their podcasts are just kind of like you'll reach out to try to be a guest or something, and they're just like really like high and mighty about it.
Right.
Like I don't see you.
Promo. I'm like, no, unless you've been on the show, I'm not playing shit, dude. Come on.
Yeah, and I'm the same way. Like I do in my audio version, put commercials and stuff in. But it's just even if I haven't been on the show, it's just one that I support what they do. And if I see people,
yeah, it just
yeah, if I see people like just being really, it's not that we can't be selective with who our guests are, because I totally respect that. It's just kind of like the way you shove people out, like I've had one that was just like really nasty to me for no reason. I was just kind of like, it's kind of unnecessary. I don't see you on a top 20 list anywhere. So I don't think you have the right, to be that kind of high and mighty about it.
Yeah. So, it's like they're calm and collected when they're on a podcast, and then they're just a psychopath on social media. I had one hysterical podcaster pal of mine, and she was just noting, like, she's running like 3 different podcasts. Like, her kids have gotten into it, her husband edits all this shit, it's fun. And she had one guy who was like complaining about her not, like, she was on his show and he was like, oh, you didn't share my promo. And then he was on her show, and she's like, okay, you're gonna share my promo. It's just like, it was just funny. I was like, I shared you, and it's like, fair enough, I made sure to rectify that, and now you're doing the same to me that you complain to others about. Come on, no free rides. Just Don't say it. Don't spray it. I don't know. Like you say, there is a lot of animosity on occasion, and it just gets a little tiresome because it's like, okay, we're all here to grow. If I don't like someone, I'm just not going to listen to the show. But I'm not going to go on Twitter and stalk you or just refuse to be, maybe they're not even being involved with that show anymore. Or maybe, again, you don't have to be a fan of the person's work to actually interact with them as a human being.
Right.
But it does get annoying too how, some of them are deliberately asking loaded questions and others aren't in on the joke. And then there's others where it's like, I don't really know what they're going for, but I'm just going to sit here on the side and just may or may not acknowledge you. But it is cool that there are different ways to talk about different subject matter on Twitter. And I don't know. I see others complaining about how the fact that they have to give a trigger warning is like, well, that's how you avoid having to have this conversation a million different times. Just talk about what you're about to talk about. And if someone still complains, they can't say they weren't warned.
Okay. Yeah.
But hey, no, glad you could be on here. You're welcome back anytime. Let's pick a topic and I'll let you know when this airs.
All right. Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm always down to talk about books. So,
totally.
I mean, you should have seen the list and having to condense it. Like, I still had like 4 more where I'm like, wait. And I'm like, no, we'll be here all day. Be here all day.
It was an interesting challenge and I had fun. I'm glad you did too.
Yeah, I did. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Follow us on the web on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The podcast is available on Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Anchor, Apple, and anywhere else podcasts are available. Feel free to review our show and leave comments on any of those sites. Thanks a million for listening.
It's a jacked up review show. It's a jacked up review show. Jacked up review show.